All right, let's get right into it. Experts are looking at the year 2026, and what they're seeing, well, it's not just another year on the calendar. They're calling it a tipping point, a moment where the very rules that have governed the world for decades are being torn up and rewritten, right before our eyes. The world we all grew up in, it's changing fast. You know, there's this quote from the philosopher Antonio Gramsci, written almost 100 years ago, and it is shockingly relevant today. The old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters. It's kind of dark, right? But it perfectly describes this dangerous, uncertain moment we're in, that chaotic space between what was and what's coming next. So, there's a specific word for this moment, an interregnum. It sounds complicated, but just think of it like this. It's a giant global power vacuum. The old system, the one that was mostly held up by the United States after the Cold War, well, it's falling apart. You can see the cracks everywhere. But here's the thing. A new, stable system with clear rules hasn't shown up to take its place. We're stuck in that messy, unpredictable in-between. So, you gotta ask, what's kicking all this off? What's the main driver behind this huge shift? Well, it all starts with the United States. America isn't just tweaking its policies here and there, it's completely rethinking its job on the world stage. And experts are calling this the Great American Retreat.
And look, this isn't just some think tank theory or a bit of speculation. It's now official U.S. policy. This quote comes directly from a recent national security strategy document. It says, the days of the United States propping up the entire world order like Atlas are over. I mean, that's about as clear as it gets, right? The era of America being the world's backstop is officially done. Which leads to the huge question, what happens next?
Well, what comes next is something called the Donro Doctrine. Now, this is a modern spin on the old 19th century Monroe Doctrine, which basically told European powers to stay out of the Americas. This new version, it turns American power inward. The focus is no longer on policing the entire globe, but on dominating its own backyard, the Western Hemisphere. It's a massive strategic shift from globalism to focusing on what's close to home.
And this isn't just a small change. It's a fundamental rewrite of America's role. For decades, we had America as the world's policeman, getting involved everywhere. Now the new model is America as its hemisphere's warden, locking down its own region, securing its own trade, its own resources. The ripple effects of this change are going to be absolutely massive.
Which brings us to the next absolutely critical question. If the U.S. is stepping back, who steps in? Or what steps in? Because there's one rule in geopolitics that never ever changes. Power vacuums do not stay empty for long.
And we're already seeing the scramble to fill that void. Suddenly, Europe is realizing it has to pay for its own defense, maybe for the first time in generations. Russia feels emboldened, waging this hybrid war of cyber attacks and disinformation to try and crack the West apart. China sees its moment to become the dominant power in Asia, finally avenging what it calls its century of humiliation. And all over the global south, nations are saying, hey, it's our turn to have a real say in how the world is.
Let's zoom in on Europe for a second, because its situation is really, really tough. For decades, its security was basically outsourced to the United States. Now that that's no longer a given, the continent is kind of paralyzed. It's politically divided, and it's really struggling to build the kind of military and political unity it needs to actually defend itself in this new world.
Okay, so this new era of competition, it's not just about tanks and missiles anymore. The real fight is shifting to new battlegrounds. We're talking technology, the global economy, and critical resources. These are the front lines of the 21st century. And at the heart of it all is the new tech race between the US and China. And you can really boil it down to a simple, massive bet. The US is betting on molecules, things like advanced energy, biotech, the physical stuff. China, on the other hand, is going all in on electrons, trying to dominate everything from artificial intelligence and microchips to the raw materials that make all that tech possible.
And when it comes to that electron race, China has a gigantic head start. Just look at this. This chart shows China's control over the processing of critical minerals. We're talking 70% of rare earths. These aren't just weird-sounding elements, they are the absolute essential ingredients for everything. EV batteries, smartphones, wind turbines. China basically has a chokehold on the global supply chain for the entire future tech economy.
Now, another huge battlefield is, of course, artificial intelligence. But the danger here isn't just about who has the smartest algorithm. It's about a massive, and I mean massive, financial bubble that might be forming around the entire industry.
Get this number in your head, $400 billion. And that's a plus on the end. That is how much money global tech companies spent on building data centers for AI in just one single year. The sheer scale of that investment is just mind-boggling.
But that leads to the trillion-dollar question, doesn't it? For all that money being poured in, where are the profits? Where are the huge productivity gains we were all promised? So far, they've been pretty hard to find. And that gap between the insane investment and the real-world results is making a lot of people nervous about a dot-com-style crash, but one that could be much, much bigger.
And the new battlegrounds don't stop there. You've got China flooding the world with super cheap goods, creating a deflation trap for other economies. The old rules of global trade are breaking down into rival regional blocs. Even something as basic as water is becoming a weapon in conflicts. And maybe the most terrifying of all, as old arms control deals fall apart, we're stumbling into what's being called a third nuclear era, a new, much more unstable age of nuclear weapons.
So we've talked about all this high-level stuff, geopolitics, economics, tech races, but what does it all mean for actual people on the ground? Because this isn't just some abstract chess game. It has very real, very human consequences, and it's creating a deeply unsettled future.
60%. Just hold that number in your mind for a second. What on earth could that represent? Well, it represents a demographic ticking time bomb, sitting right at the heart of some of the world's most volatile regions.
That's the percentage of the population in the Middle East and Africa that is under the age of 25. Let me say that again, 60%. We're talking about almost 900 million young people, all coming of age in a world with more conflict, more economic pressure, and fewer opportunities than ever before. And you can bet they are not just sitting back and accepting it. This is what some are calling the Gen Z rebellion. They're fed up with corruption, they can't find jobs, and so this massive wave of youth-led protests is already shaking and in some cases toppling governments across the global south. This demographic pressure is a huge, powerful engine for change and instability.
And that brings us right back to where we started. The old world is dying. That's clear. New conflicts, new technologies, and a whole new generation are forcing a complete reset of the global order. So the question for 2026 and for all the years after isn't if the world is going to change. The real question is, as this new world struggles to be born, what kind of monsters or what kind of wonders will be born with it?